All I want is an ordinary moment here with you. No distractions. Tell the world that you're busy doing nothing. Cancel everything. Let it go.
Hi, I'm David Smith. Welcome to No Kill in Motion. I'm very excited to have Alan Rosenberg from the New Jersey Animal Observer here today and Aubrie Kavanaugh from No Kill Huntsville. We're going to be talking about LRR and related to the pandemic, especially because this is a question that has always been uh, part of a lively conversation in animal welfare. Live release rates are something that we use as a measurement. It doesn't tell the whole story, but it tells part of the story. So I'm going to start with you, Aubrie, actually, and talk about LRR, live release rate, and the way that we viewed it and the misconceptions about what it actually means as just a number.
Okay, the live release rate is kind of what the name implies. It's the percentage of animals that leave the building alive. So it's not the same as the save rate. What we look at is live outcomes compared to non-live outcomes, meaning animals that were euthanized, maybe they died in care, maybe they got lost in care. And then we just see the percentage of the animals that left the building alive. Historically in the past, there was a time probably about 10 years ago where 90% as a live release rate was an indicator of a shelter's level of progress. It was never the goal. It was just kind of a byproduct of saving healthy and treatable animals. At some point along the line, people started to see that as the goal, as the end all be all, which is unfortunate because over this last decade, veterinary medicine has improved, shelter medicine has improved. So what we find is that the 90%, although it's a good indicator of a degree of progress, there are shelters that are saving 97%, 98% of animals. And on the other negative that we've had is we have some places that are striving simply to meet that 90%. They're doing what I would call new math, which means improper math in the meantime. I think we saw that earlier this year when we had the state of Michigan claiming that it was a no-kill state using statistics when the percentages of animals being destroyed that were reportedly owner-requested euthanasia were just through the roof. So what we've done is we've gone from a byproduct of a more progressive way of functioning to people using it as this is what we've got to do. They're actually misrepresenting what's really happening to hit that number. And that number is not really relevant in any event anyway because of the advances in shelter medicine and just how shelters operate.
Okay, and so with the pandemic, we've seen an interesting change in numbers naturally because we were trying, many shelters were trying to keep animals out of shelters, and they have been, which also changes the number of animals available for adoption or the number of animals going to foster. And Alan, I know you've done some research on shelters like Pima, Lake County, and I forget a third one we just talked about. Okay. Right, and you've seen some indications of changes in those. Why don't you tell us what you've actually observed in the time period that you're actually looking at?
Yeah, so as you said, there's been this talk in the animal welfare community, even in the progressive animal welfare community, that the mix of animals in the post-COVID-19 world is going to be more challenging, and therefore live release rates should be lower, and perhaps the 90% benchmark for an indicator of no kill is too high. So to look at those claims, I examined 3 progressive shelters that you mentioned. And really the key takeaway here is from these 3 shelters is in regards to Pima and Casey Pet Project, their live release rates remained around the same when you look at the post-COVID months this year compared to the same months last year. The dogs in one shelter, the live release went up a little bit, and the cat live release rate went down a little bit at that shelter, and vice versa for the other one. The interesting thing was Lake County Animal Shelter. Lake County Animal Shelter actually increased both its dog and cat live release rate, and was able to achieve a 99.3% dog live release rate from April to June in 2020, and a 92.1% cat live release rate during that same period. So I think the key takeaway in my view is this. Yes, the mix of animals is becoming more challenging for shelters because they're not taking in healthy strays, for example. However, those shelters now have more financial resources, more staff resources, and more volunteer resources per each individual animal. And additionally, the animal control shelters now have more space available. So that means they have more time to work with these animals to help solve those issues, when before they wouldn't have that time because they would run out of space. So in my view, if the shelter is progressive and has that strong no-kill culture and that strong commitment to not killing animals, they can either maintain a high live release rate or even increase it.
You made me think of an interesting question. I'm going to go back to you, Aubrie, because I know you have some experience in this. And that is, if I, as a shelter organization, start taking in less animals, how do I go back to whatever funding vehicle I have to justify keeping my budget the same? Like Alan said, they have more revenue per animal to actually take care of the animals they have, and that's how they can actually keep that live release rate where it is. But you know, what's the argument that you use, not argument, but the justification that you use to you know, city council, county council, whatever, even state, to keep them understanding that, you know, there are other services that you do to actually do this, and we still need the same budget in order to complete the job?
I think the argument is just a shift in how some of the services happen. I think that what we have is historically shelters were pounds, and still even to this day, we have regressive shelters that do what we call catch and kill, first in, first out. As shelters have become more progressive, they've seen these problems not as animal problems, but as people problems, and that's what they are. Shelter intake is a result of the behavior of the people that own or care for the animals. So I think if we go one step further, the argument is, okay, mayor and city council, we may have fewer animals in the building, but we have fewer animals in the building because we're devoting more time to helping those people so that we can keep animals out of the building. So it's not like we're providing less services, we're just changing the shape of the services we provide. So for example, if you've got a shelter that doesn't do what's called pet retention, which is one of the programs of the no-kill equation, they don't do surrender counseling to figure out, okay, why do you really think that you need to bring this owned animal here? They just take that animal in. In days of old, they would take in an animal, don't ask any questions, and potentially the animal is destroyed. Well, now if that shelter is spending time having a conversation with somebody to say, okay, let's get to the bottom. Why do you think that this is the only choice you have? Again, it's not like people aren't working, they're just working performing other tasks. So I think that we have to help elected officials and, you know, people that are involved with budgeting to see that just because there are fewer animals in the building doesn't mean necessarily that less work is being done. And having said that, I'm talking about progressive places, okay? Because I think the pandemic has shown that progressive places, they're thinking outside the box, they're doing creative things, and they're keeping everybody busy. Now, there are some shelters where they've used the pandemic and some guidance that came out from the National Animal Care and Control Association months ago to essentially say, we're not doing animal control anymore. We're not picking up healthy animals. We won't take animals found running at large by the public. They're using the pandemic as an excuse to really limit the services they provide, but while not using the staff and resources in a creative way. They've essentially shut the door in their involvement with the public, and shame on them.
Well, you know, and that leads me to the last question, I think, Alan, and it's because you were, you know, we were talking about some of the numbers that you saw, and part of it was intake, part of it was adoptions. What was the relationship there between those numbers that you found?
So, I mean, in terms of the pandemic, you're talking about, David?
Yes.
Yeah, so since COVID-19 hit nationally, intake initially went down significantly across the country. And that was why shelters really stopped killing animals, because they had all this extra space. That's why live release rates across the country went much higher. Since COVID-19 has hit in the last 5 months or so, the intake is starting to normalize. It's still down year over year. Just to put some perspective, I think it was down maybe around 50% earlier in the year, and now it's down maybe around 25%. But the live release rate improvement has remained because the physical shelter spaces haven't filled up yet. They're starting to get they're not as empty as they were before, but they're still pretty empty. So I think over the long run, shelters will eventually normalize intake, and we will be back in a world where we were before COVID-19, unless, of course, this new sheltering model from the Humane Animal Support Services, where that would be effectively maintain the COVID-19 model of sheltering. So I think it remains to be seen. But I think if shelters are not applying the HACCP model, they will go back to the normal sheltering intake model that we saw before COVID-19.
I will just say in my area that we have normalized already. If you look at our figures from June of 2020 compared to June 2019, the intake was actually higher. So while there was a short period of time where there was less intake and more people were fostering, of course, we're still in the middle of a pandemic, but the numbers have essentially normalized.
Well, I think we have to keep watching the numbers on this and actually see if we have a success rate that continues. Something you mentioned, Aubrie, is, we have to look at different types of shelter. We have progressive shelters, we have regressive shelters. It will be interesting and tragic if they go in two different directions, right? If the progressive shelters actually do keep getting better and the aggressive ones actually go backwards because of taking on the excuse that some of the new ideas could actually provide them. But that's all the time we have. Thank you both for being here today. It was great talking to you, and we will be back again soon. Thank you for joining No Kill in Motion. Goodbye, everybody.